I was still holding a plate of cranberry sauce when my son looked me in the eye, cold distant, and told me to leave his house on Thanksgiving. Not later, not after dinner. Right then. The room went silent. My daughter-in-law didn't even try to hide her satisfaction, and just like that, I became a stranger in the home I helped pay for, in front of people who used to call me family. I stepped out into the cold with nothing but my purse and the sinking feeling that something much bigger was happening behind my back. If you've ever been hurt by someone you raised with love, I'd really like to hear your story. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes sharing these stories is the only way we remind ourselves we're not alone. My name is Hadley Brooks. I'm 62 years old, and until last Thanksgiving, I believed I had done one thing right in my life. I had raised a good son. I live in Columbus, Ohio, or at least I used to say that with a sense of belonging. Now when people ask, I hesitate, because home, I've learned, isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person, and when that person turns away from you, everything you thought was solid begins to feel temporary. My husband, George Brooks, passed away 3 years ago. It was sudden, a stroke that came out of nowhere on a quiet Sunday morning. One moment, he was sitting at the kitchen table complaining about how I overcooked the eggs, and the next, he was gone, just like that. 40 years of marriage reduced to silence in a hospital hallway. George wasn't just my husband. He was the kind of man who fixed things, broken chairs, leaky faucets, and sometimes even broken days. And when he died, I didn't just lose him. I lost the balance in my life. The steady voice that always reminded me, Hadley, you've done enough. Let the boy stand on his own. But I didn't listen. Because when you only have one child, when that child is the center of your entire world, it's hard to step back. It's hard to stop giving even when there's nothing left to give. My son, Ethan Brooks, was always a gentle boy growing up. Quiet, thoughtful. The kind of kid who would bring me dandelions from the yard and act like they were roses. When George worked late, it was just the two of us, me sewing late into the night at my little shop and Ethan doing his homework at the corner table. That shop, it was everything to me. Hadley's Stitch and Mend, a small place on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. It helped us survive when George's hours were cut years ago, and more than that, it gave me a sense of pride. Every dress I altered, every hem I fixed, it all added up to a life built with my own hands. I worked long hours, sometimes too long. I missed school plays, I missed parent meetings, but I made sure Ethan had what he needed. Clothes that fit, food on the table, a chance to go to college without worrying about how he'd pay for it. And when he graduated, I remember sitting in that auditorium, clapping until my hands hurt, thinking, we made it. He's going to have a better life than we did. That was always the goal. A few years after college, Ethan got a steady job in marketing. Nothing glamorous, but stable. He called me one evening, his voice full of excitement, telling me he'd met someone. Her name is Vanessa, he said. Mom, she's amazing. I remember smiling into the phone, even though I couldn't see her. Then she must be, I told him, because you've always had good judgment. At least that's what I believed back then. The first time I met Vanessa, she was polite, beautiful, too well dressed. Confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room like she already belonged there. She hugged me lightly, the kind of hug that doesn't quite reach the heart. It's so nice to finally meet you, Hadley, she said. Not Mom, not Mrs. Brooks, just Hadley. I told myself not to overthink it. They got married a year later, small ceremony. I helped pay for part of it, of course. Not because they asked, but because that's what I'd always done. I helped, I supported, I made things easier. When they started talking about buying a house, Ethan hesitated at first. The market was tough. Prices were rising. He didn't think they could afford anything decent. That's when I made a decision that at the time felt like love. I sold my shop. It wasn't easy. I still remember the day I handed over the keys. The new owner shook my hand and said, "You built something special here." I smiled, but inside something cracked. That shop wasn't just a business. It was a piece of me. Years of early mornings and late nights, of sacrifice. But I told myself it was worth it. Because that money, every last dollar from the sale, went toward the down payment for Ethan and Vanessa's house. I didn't make a big speech about it. I didn't ask for recognition. I simply told Ethan, "This will help you get started. That's all I want." He cried when I gave it to him, wrapped his arms around me tight. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I said. "Just build a good life." For a while, everything seemed fine. They moved into a beautiful suburban home, 2 stories, a small backyard, a kitchen big enough for family dinners. Ethan would call me on Sundays, just like he used to. Vanessa would join sometimes, her voice cheerful, controlled. But slowly, things began to change. At first, it was small. Ethan stopped calling every week, then every other week, then only when I called him first. When I asked if I could stop by, there was always a reason it wasn't a good time. "We're busy this weekend, Mom. Vanessa has friends over. We're just trying to settle into a routine." I understood. Or at least I tried to. New marriage, new responsibilities. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who hovered. But then Vanessa started setting what she called boundaries. "She just thinks it's important we have our own space," Ethan explained one evening, his tone careful. "You know, healthy distance. Healthy." That word stayed with me longer than it should have, because I began to wonder, when did a mother become something you needed distance from? I adjusted. I called less, visited less, waited for invitations instead of assuming I was welcome. And when I was invited, something always felt slightly off. Vanessa would smile, but her eyes never quite softened. She'd make comments that sounded polite on the surface, but carried something sharper underneath. "Oh, Hadley, you didn't have to bring anything," she'd say, glancing at the dish in my hands. "We're trying to keep things simple." Or, "Ethan's been so busy lately. I've been helping him stay focused." Helping him. I started noticing how often she spoke for him, how often Ethan would look at her before answering even the simplest questions. One evening after dinner, Ethan pulled me aside. "Mom, Vanessa and I were thinking, maybe you shouldn't drop by without calling first." I blinked at him. "I always call." "Well, maybe just give us more notice. More notice than a day a week." I nodded anyway, because arguing felt like pushing him further away, and I couldn't risk that. Then came the paperwork. It started casually. "Hey, Mom." Ethan said one afternoon over the phone, "We're organizing some financial stuff. Vanessa thought it might be smart to get everything clear just in case. You know, future planning." "Future planning," I repeated. "Yeah, like making sure there's no confusion about assets or anything like that." Assets. It sounded like such a cold word coming from my son. He mentioned a few documents, said it would be easier if I signed them just to clarify things. I asked what exactly I'd be signing. "Oh, nothing serious," he said quickly, "just standard stuff." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not fear, not yet, but unease, because Ethan had never been vague with me before. "Let me take a look at them first," I said gently. There was a pause on the line. "Just a second too long." "Sure," he said, "of course." But the documents never came. Days passed, then weeks, and whenever I brought it up, Ethan brushed it off. "We'll get to it," he'd say. Vanessa, however, didn't forget. At the next family gathering, she brought it up in front of others, lightly, casually. "Hadley's just being cautious," she said with a small laugh, which is understandable. But the way she looked at me, it didn't feel understanding at all. It felt like assessment, like I was being measured, and somehow found inconvenient. I went home that night with a tight feeling in my chest I couldn't quite explain. Looking back now, I realized that was the beginning. Not the Thanksgiving dinner, not the moment Ethan told me to leave. No, this was where it started. The quiet shifting of roles, the slow rewriting of truth, the subtle suggestion that I was no longer part of the foundation, but a problem to be managed. And the most painful part, I let it happen, because I loved my son more than I trusted my instincts. And that was a mistake I would come to understand far too late. If I could go back to the moment things first started to feel wrong, I don't know if I would have done anything differently. That's the hardest truth to admit. Because love, real unconditional love, doesn't come with a switch you can turn off. When something feels uncomfortable, it makes you rationalize. It makes you wait. It makes you hope that what you're seeing isn't what's really happening. And for a long time, I told myself exactly that I was imagining things, that Vanessa was just particular, that Ethan was just adjusting to married life. but little by little, the cracks began to widen. It started with silence. Ethan used to call me every Sunday afternoon like clockwork. It didn't matter how busy he was, he always made time. We'd talk about everything and nothing. Work weather, the neighbors' old memories that made us both laugh. Then those calls became shorter. Then they became irregular. Then they stopped altogether. At first I told myself not to be dramatic. People get busy. Life changes. I didn't want to be that mother who demanded attention, so I started calling him instead. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he didn't. When he did, there was always a subtle distance in his voice, like he was speaking from another room, even when I knew he wasn't. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" he'd ask almost cautiously. That word okay felt strange, as if my calling him needed justification now. "Yes, sweetheart," I'd say. "I just wanted to hear your voice." A pause, then a polite response. "Yeah, things are just a little busy right now, busy." That word became a wall between us. Then came the visits. I used to stop by occasionally, never unannounced, never intrusive, just a quick visit with leftovers or to drop off something I'd made. But suddenly even that became complicated. "We'd really appreciate a heads up," Ethan said one afternoon when I mentioned I was nearby. "I did call," I reminded him gently. "Well, yeah, but maybe just more notice next time. More notice." I repeated his words silently after we hung up, trying to understand what had changed. I hadn't changed, so something else had. The next time I visited, I noticed something different. Vanessa greeted me at the door with a bright smile, but her eyes scanned me quickly from my shoes to my hands to the container I was holding. "Oh, Hadley," she said, her tone light but edged. "You didn't have to bring anything. We're trying to cut back on unnecessary things." Unnecessary. I held the dish a little tighter. "It's just Ethan's favorite," I said softly. "I thought, that's sweet," she interrupted. "But we're trying to be more intentional about what we keep in the house." Intentional. Another word that sounded harmless but didn't feel that way. Inside the house looked different too, not physically. The furniture was the same. The layout unchanged. But the feeling had shifted. It no longer felt like a place where I could sit down without asking, where I could move freely, where I belonged. Everything felt curated, even the conversation. Vanessa spoke more than Ethan, answered questions directed at him, redirected topics when they drifted into anything personal. "So Ethan's been doing really well at work," she said, smiling at me across the table. I turned to him. "That's wonderful. What's new?" He hesitated just for a second, then glanced at Vanessa before answering. "Oh, just projects. Projects." It was like talking to someone through a filter. After dinner, while I was helping clear the table, I overheard Vanessa in the living room speaking to her sister Chloe. "She means well," Vanessa said quietly. "But sometimes people don't realize when they're overstepping. I froze for a moment, a plate still in my hand. I wasn't sure if she meant me, but deep down, I knew. That night, I drove home with a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. Still, I said nothing, because saying something felt like risking everything, and I wasn't ready for that. Weeks passed and the distance grew. Then came the first real moment that made me question everything. Ethan invited me over one afternoon. "Just the two of us," he said. That alone felt unusual. When I arrived, Vanessa wasn't home, or at least that's what Ethan told me. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a moment it felt like old times. Just me and my boy. "Mom," he said, his tone careful, "Vanessa, and I have been thinking about the future." I nodded. "That's good. You should." "Yeah, and we just want to make sure everything is clear." There it was again. That word, clear. He pulled out a folder. "There are a few documents," he said. "Nothing serious, just making sure there's no confusion about anything down the line." I looked at the folder, but I didn't reach for it. "What kind of documents, Ethan?" He hesitated. "Well, just stuff about the house, ownership, financial responsibilities, that kind of thing." My heart skipped a beat. "The house," I repeated. "Yeah," he said quickly, "just standard procedure." Vanessa's idea. Of course it was. I leaned back slightly. "I'd like to read them first," I said calmly. "Of course," he replied. "I can leave them with you." But something in his tone felt rehearsed. Like he had expected resistance. Who prepared these? I asked. A lawyer Vanessa knows, he said. Not our lawyer. Not the one George had trusted for years. Someone else. I think I'd feel more comfortable if I had them reviewed, I said gently. Ethan's expression changed just slightly, a flicker of frustration, or maybe disappointment. Mom, it's really nothing complicated, he insisted. I'm sure it isn't, I said. But I'd still like to understand what I'm signing. There was a pause. Then he nodded. Okay, that's fine. But it didn't feel fine. Not really, because from that moment on, something shifted again. The warmth that had briefly returned disappeared. The next time I called Ethan sounded distant. The next time I visited Vanessa was colder than ever. And the documents, they were never mentioned again. As if my hesitation had disqualified me, as if I had failed some kind of test. That's when I started noticing more. The way Vanessa would subtly correct me in conversations. Oh, that's not quite how it happened, Hadley. Or the way she'd laugh lightly when I shared a memory. That's one way to remember it, I guess. It was never outright disrespect. Never something I could point to and say, that was wrong. But it was enough. Enough to make me question myself. Enough to make me feel like I was slowly being rewritten out of my own story. And Ethan, he didn't defend me. He didn't challenge her. He just adjusted, adapted, followed. That was the part that hurt the most. Not Vanessa's behavior, but Ethan's silence. Because silence, I've learned, can be louder than any accusation. By the time Thanksgiving approached, I had already begun to feel like a guest in their lives, a polite obligation, someone invited out of tradition, not love. Still, when Ethan called and asked me to come early to help prepare dinner, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this was his way of reaching back toward me. I held on to that hope tighter than I should have, because hope can be a dangerous thing, when it blinds you to what's already unfolding right in front of you. And I had no idea that Thanksgiving wouldn't be a reconciliation. It would be a performance, one that had been carefully planned, and I was walking straight into it. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I had already convinced myself that things were going to be different. I needed to believe that, because if I didn't, then all those small moments, the distance, the coldness, the strange conversations would mean something I wasn't ready to face. So when Ethan called 2 days before Thanksgiving and said, "Mom, can you come early this year? We could really use your help in the kitchen," I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I'd love to, and I meant it. That simple invitation felt like a door opening again, like maybe, just maybe, my place in his life hadn't disappeared entirely. I spent the next day preparing. I woke up early, made a list, and drove to 3 different grocery stores to make sure I got everything just right. Fresh herbs for the stuffing, the exact brand of cranberry sauce Ethan had always liked as a child. Sweet potatoes for the casserole George used to insist wasn't complete without extra brown sugar. I even pulled out my old recipe box, the one with handwritten cards worn soft at the edges, and chose the dishes Ethan used to request every year. It felt like stepping back into a version of myself I hadn't been allowed to be in a long time. A mother who was needed, a mother who belonged. That morning, I dressed carefully. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. I chose a soft blue blouse and a cardigan George had always liked on me. As I looked in the mirror, I tried to ignore the faint nervousness behind my eyes. "You're overthinking this, Hadley," I whispered to myself. I packed everything into the car dishes. Ingredients, even a small box of decorations I thought might add a warm touch to the table. And then I drove to Ethan's house, the same house I had helped make possible. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed more cars than I expected. I paused for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. That's fine, I told myself. It's Thanksgiving. Of course there would be guests. I grabbed the containers from the back seat and walked up to the front door, balancing everything carefully. Before I could knock, the door opened. Vanessa stood there. Her smile was immediate, polished, perfect. "Hadley," she said brightly. "You made it." "I did," I replied, adjusting the containers in my arms. "I brought a few things." "Oh," she said, her eyes flicking briefly to what I was holding. "You really didn't have to go through all that trouble." Her tone was light, but something underneath it felt dismissive. "It's no trouble," I said gently. "It's what I always do." "Yes, well," she replied, stepping aside to let me in. We're trying to simplify things this year. Simplify. Another one of those words. I walked inside, taking in the familiar space that somehow felt less familiar every time I entered it. The living room was already full. I recognized a few faces, neighbors, some of Ethan's co-workers, but most of them were strangers. Vanessa's sister, Chloe, was there too, sitting comfortably on the couch, laughing as if she owned the place. "Oh, this must be Hadley," Chloe said as I stepped in. Her tone was curious, almost amused. "Yes," I said, offering a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you." Likewise, she replied, her eyes lingering on me a moment too long. I shifted slightly, suddenly aware of how I must look, arms full, standing awkwardly in a room where everyone else seemed completely at ease. "Kitchen's this way," Vanessa said, already turning away. I followed her, setting my dishes down on the counter. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. There was already a turkey in the oven. Side dishes lined up, neatly labeled with small tags. Everything looked planned, organized, controlled. "I thought you said you needed help," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Vanessa glanced at me, then at the counter. "Oh, we got most of it done yesterday," she said. "But you can assist." Assist. I nodded, swallowing the small sting that came with that word. "Of course," I said. Ethan walked in just then. For a moment, just a moment, his face softened when he saw me. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping forward. He hugged me quickly, not tightly, not the way he used to. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, holding on to that brief contact longer than I should have. "You made a lot," he said, glancing at the dishes. "She always does," Vanessa added lightly from behind him. Something about the way she said it made it sound less like appreciation and more like criticism. "I just wanted to help," I said. "And we appreciate that," Ethan said quickly, but his eyes flickered toward Vanessa as he spoke. That same glance I had noticed before. That silent check-in. I busied myself in the kitchen trying to find where I fit, but every time I reached for something, it felt like I was slightly out of sync. Vanessa had already planned everything. Every dish had its place. Every step had its timing. I was no longer needed, just tolerated. As guests began to gather around the dining table, I tried to join the conversation, but it felt like stepping into a rhythm that didn't include me. "So Hadley, one of Vanessa's friends, said Ethan tells us you used to run a little sewing shop." "Used to." "Yes," I said, "for many years." "That's nice." She replied, her tone polite but uninterested. Vanessa leaned in slightly. "She was very dedicated to it," she said. "Sometimes a little too dedicated." A few people chuckled softly. I smiled, though I wasn't sure why. "Work was important," I said simply. "Of course," Vanessa replied, "but balance is important too. Knowing when to step back." There it was again, that phrase, that subtle suggestion. I felt it settle over the table like something invisible but heavy. Ethan shifted in his seat. "Vanessa," he said quietly. "What?" She replied, feigning innocence. "I'm just saying we all have to know our place in different stages of life. Our place." I looked down at my plate for a moment, the edges of my vision tightening. No one said anything, but I could feel it. The shift, the unspoken agreement hanging in the air. I was no longer being spoken to. I was being spoken about, as if I weren't sitting right there. I forced a small smile and reached for my water glass. "Excuse me," I said softly, standing up. "I just need a moment." No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. I walked back into the kitchen, placing my hands on the counter, trying to steady myself. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, smaller, quieter, like someone slowly fading, and for the first time, I felt it clearly. This wasn't just discomfort, this wasn't just awkwardness, this was something intentional, something being built, piece by piece, and I was standing right in the middle of it, still hoping it would change, still believing that Ethan would see it. Still holding on to the idea that this was just a misunderstanding, but deep down, something inside me had already begun to whisper the truth. This wasn't going to end gently, and whatever was coming next, it had already been set in motion. I should have left when that feeling settled in my chest, that quiet, unmistakable warning that something wasn't right. But I didn't. Because a part of me still believed, needed to believe, that this was just an uncomfortable dinner, that if I stayed calm, if I stayed kind, if I didn't react, things would settle. So I went back to the table. I sat down, folded my napkin neatly in my lap, and tried to rejoin a conversation that had clearly moved on without me. Vanessa was laughing about something Chloe had said. Ethan was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I picked up my fork. The food looked beautiful, perfectly arranged, carefully curated, but I couldn't taste anything. So Chloe said, suddenly leaning back in her chair and looking directly at me, "Ethan mentioned you used to help out a lot, financially." The word hung in the air like a challenge. I blinked. "I've helped when I could," I said carefully. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Yes," she said. "Hadley has been very involved." Involved, another one of those words. I set my fork down. "I've always just tried to support my son," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And that's admirable," Vanessa replied quickly. "But at some point, don't you think support can turn into dependency?" The room went quiet, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for me to feel every pair of eyes shift, even if only slightly. "I'm not sure I understand," I said. Vanessa smiled. "Oh, I'm just saying Ethan and I are building our own life now, and sometimes it's important for parents to step back and let that happen without interference." Interference. I felt something inside me tighten. "I've never interfered," I said softly. Vanessa let out a small, almost sympathetic laugh. "Well, perception can be different from intention." A few people shifted in their seats. No one spoke. I turned to Ethan. He was looking down at his plate. "Ethan," I said quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Vanessa's just trying to explain how we've been feeling," he said finally. "We." The word landed harder than anything Vanessa had said. Feeling about what I asked. He hesitated, then he looked up, and for a brief second I saw something in his eyes. Conflict. But it passed quickly. "About boundaries," he said. That word again. I felt my hands grow cold. "I thought we had boundaries," I said. "I call before I visit. I don't come over unless I'm invited. It's not just that Mom," Ethan interrupted, his voice firmer now. "Mom, he hadn't called me that all evening. It's everything," he continued. "The way you're always involved. What I asked, my voice barely above a whisper." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "The way you make everything about you," she said calmly. I stared at her. "You sold your shop to help us," she continued, cutting me off gently. "And that was generous, truly. But sometimes it feels like that comes with expectations." Expectations. The word hit me like a physical blow. "I never asked for anything in return," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. "No," Vanessa said softly. She glanced at Ethan, and that was all it took. He straightened in his seat. "Mom," he said, "sometimes it feels like you still think this is your house." The room went completely still. I blinked. "I've never you show up with food, with decorations, with opinions," he continued. "You rearrange things. You make comments about how things used to be. It's like you don't see that this is our life now. Our life, separate from mine." "I was just trying to help," I said. "I know," he replied, "but it doesn't feel like help anymore." Each word felt like something breaking, quietly, irreversibly. "I didn't realize I was making you feel that way," I said. Vanessa sighed softly. "That's the problem, Hadley," she said. "You don't realize it." There it was. Not anger, not shouting, just certainty. Like a conclusion they had already reached long before this dinner. I looked around the table, at the faces of people who barely knew me, who were watching this unfold like it was just another conversation. No one spoke. No one stepped in. I turned back to Ethan. "Is this how you really feel?" I asked. This time there was no hesitation. "Yes," he said. The word echoed in my chest. I nodded slowly. "Then I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, because even in that moment I was still trying to understand where I had gone wrong. But Vanessa wasn't finished, and honestly, she added, her tone still calm, still measured. "It might be better if you gave us some space." Real space. Space. The final word. The one that meant something very different than all the others. I felt it before Ethan even spoke. That shift. That final step. "Mom," he said, his voice quieter now. "Maybe it's time you head home." Home. I almost laughed at the word, because suddenly I wasn't sure where that was anymore. After dinner, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ethan looked at Vanessa, then back at me. "No," he said. "Not after dinner, not later, now." The word didn't need to be spoken. It was already there. in the silence, in the way no one protested, in the way Vanessa sat back slightly as if something had finally been resolved. I stood up slowly. My chair made a soft sound against the floor. No one moved to stop me. No one said, "Wait." I looked at Ethan, really looked at him, at the boy I had raised, at the man sitting in front of me now, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. "I didn't realize I had become a problem in your life," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is," he replied, but neither of us believed that. I picked up my purse. My coat was still in the hallway. I walked toward it slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind me, I could hear the faint murmur of voices starting again, like the moment had already passed, like I had already been erased. I slipped on my coat with trembling hands. No one followed me. No one called my name. And then I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp, immediate, unforgiving. I stepped outside and the door closed behind me. Just like that, I stood on the porch for a moment, staring out at the dark street. The cars lining the curb, the faint glow of lights from other homes where families were laughing, eating, celebrating. I walked to my car slowly. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. I sat inside, closed it, and just sat there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to understand how everything had changed so completely, how love could turn into something unrecognizable, and then, without warning, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady, unstoppable. I started the engine. The windshield blurred as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. I drove without thinking, without direction, just away. Away from the house, away from the table, away from the moment my son chose a life that didn't include me. And as the road stretched out in front of me, empty and dark, one thought settled in my mind, clearer than anything else. This wasn't just about dinner. This wasn't just about boundaries. Something deeper had been building, something I hadn't fully seen. And whatever it wasn't over. Not yet. I don't remember how long I drove that night, only that I couldn't bring myself to go home, because home at that moment felt like a word that no longer belonged to me. The rain kept falling steady and relentless, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. I followed the highway without thinking, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, as if letting go would cause everything to collapse. Eventually, exhaustion made the decision for me. I pulled into a small roadside motel just off the interstate, one of those places you pass 100 times without ever noticing. A flickering neon sign, half-empty parking lot, curtains drawn tight behind every window. Temporary. That word felt fitting. I sat there for a moment, then forced myself to move. Inside the office, the clerk barely looked up. I paid in cash, took the key, and walked to the room at the far end of the building. When I stepped inside, the silence hit me first. No laughter, no voices, no expectations. Just a narrow bed, a small table, and the hum of an old heater struggling against the cold. I set my purse down and closed the door behind me, and for the first time since I left that house, I let myself feel it fully, the humiliation, the disbelief, the quiet aching question that wouldn't stop repeating in my mind. How did we get here? I sat on the edge of the bed, my coat still on my hands, resting in my lap like I didn't know what to do with them anymore. My phone buzzed. Once, then again. I looked down. Ethan. His name on the screen felt like something from another life. I didn't answer. Not the first time, not the second, not the third. Eventually, the calls stopped, and in their place, silence returned. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the wall. My eyes drifted to the small nightstand beside the bed. There was nothing on it except a cheap lamp and my phone. I picked it up again, not to call anyone, but to scroll through old messages, old voicemails, old pieces of a life that suddenly felt distant. That's when I found it. A voicemail from George. 3 years old. I hadn't listened to it in a long time. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment, then I pressed play. Hadley. His voice came through warm and familiar, like he was sitting right beside me. If you're hearing this, it means I probably forgot to tell you something important again. I let out a soft, broken laugh. That sounded like him. I've been thinking a lot lately, he continued, about Ethan, about the kind of man he's becoming. My chest tightened. He's a good boy, George said, but he's also easily influenced. He wants to make people happy, and sometimes that means he listens to the wrong voices. I closed my eyes, because suddenly, those words didn't feel like the past. They felt like the present. If anything ever feels off, George went on his tone more serious now. Don't ignore it. You've always trusted your heart, Hadley. Don't stop doing that just because it's easier. Easier. I swallowed hard. I've put some things in place, he added, just in case. Nothing dramatic, just protection. For you, for what we built together. My breath caught. I know you, he said gently. You'll try to give everything away if you think it'll make Ethan's life better. But there's a difference between helping and disappearing. A tear slid down my cheek. I won't always be here to remind you of that, George said. So I need you to remember it for yourself. The message ended with a soft click. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold room around me. Protection. That word lingered, because I suddenly realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. George had known. Not exactly what would happen, but enough. Enough to prepare for it. I leaned forward, pressing my elbows against my knees, my thoughts racing now. The paperwork Ethan had mentioned, the vague explanations, the way Vanessa had pushed for signatures without clarity. And then, George's voice again. I've put some things in place. A slow, uneasy understanding began to form. Whatever George had done, it wasn't just about money. It was about foresight, about protecting something I hadn't realized was at risk, or maybe protecting me from something I hadn't wanted to see. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was a missed call notification from earlier that day. Unknown number, followed by a voicemail. I frowned slightly and tapped on it. Miss Brooks, this is Linda Carver from Carver and Associates. I've been trying to reach you regarding a matter left in our care by your late husband, George Brooks. It's important that we speak as soon as possible. Please return my call at your earliest convenience. I froze. Carver and Associates, the name stirred something in my memory. George's lawyer. The one he had trusted for years. The one we hadn't spoken to since before he passed. My heart began to beat faster. I checked the timestamp. The call had come early that morning, before Thanksgiving dinner, before everything fell apart. A strange feeling settled over me. Not fear, not exactly. Something sharper, more focused, like pieces of a puzzle beginning to shift into place. I stood up slowly, pacing the small room. Why now? Why had the lawyer called today of all days? What matter could possibly still be pending after 3 years? And more importantly, what had George set in motion? I stopped near the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out into the dark parking lot. The rain had slowed. The world outside looked still, quiet. But inside me, something had changed. For the first time since Ethan told me to leave, I didn't feel completely powerless. Confused, yes. Hurt, absolutely, but not powerless, because George had left something behind. Something intentional. Something that was meant to be revealed at the right time. And somehow, that time had arrived. I picked up my phone again, staring at the number. My finger hovered for a moment. Then I pressed call. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Carver and Associates. A calm voice answered. This is Hadley Brooks, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I believe you called me. There was a brief pause. Then Miss Brooks, the woman said, her tone shifting slightly. Thank you for returning my call. I've been trying to reach you. There's something we need to discuss. Regarding your husband's final arrangements. Final arrangements. The phrase sent a quiet chill through me. I'm listening, I said. Another pause. Measured, careful. Your husband left specific instructions, she said slowly, to be carried out under certain conditions. My grip on the phone tightened. What kind of conditions? Her answer came clear and deliberate. Conditions that, based on the timing of today, may have just been met. My heart skipped. The room felt smaller, closer, and suddenly, Thanksgiving didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a trigger. Something had been set in motion long before that dinner, long before Vanessa, long before Ethan changed, and whatever it was about to surface. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on top of the thin motel blanket, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling as the hours dragged by in slow, uneven breaths. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image, Ethan's face across the dinner table, steady, certain, as he told me to leave. And then George's voice would follow. If anything ever feels off, don't ignore it. By morning, my body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Focused, determined. I got up before the sun fully rose, washed my face in the small sink, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me didn't look broken. Tired, yes. Worn, certainly. But not broken. And for the first time since everything had unraveled, I felt something else beneath the pain. Clarity. I picked up my phone and called Linda Carver again. This time she answered immediately. Miss Brooks. She said, her voice professional but warmer than before. I'm glad you called back. I'd like to come in, I said, as soon as possible. There was no hesitation. We can see you this morning, she replied. 10 o'clock, I'll be there. I hung up and took a slow breath. Whatever George had left behind, I was ready to face it. Carver and Associates was located downtown in a building George had always described as too fancy for the kind of work they do. I remembered coming here once, years ago, sitting beside him in the waiting room while he joked about legal fees and paperwork. Back then, it had felt distant, irrelevant. Now, as I walked through the glass doors, it felt like stepping into something that had been waiting for me. The receptionist greeted me politely and asked me to take a seat. I didn't have to wait long. A woman in her late 50s approached me, her posture straight, her expression calm but attentive. Hadley, she asked. Yes, I'm Linda Carver. We shook hands. Her grip was firm. Please come with me. She led me down a quiet hallway into a private office. The room was simple but elegant, dark wood desk, neatly arranged files. A large window overlooking the city. Would you like some coffee, she asked. No, thank you, I said. I'd rather just understand why I'm here. She nodded as if she expected that answer. Of course. She sat across from me and opened a folder. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked at me carefully, thoughtfully. Before we begin, she said, I need to ask you something. I braced myself. Did something happen yesterday, she asked. The question landed softly, but heavily. I held her gaze. Yes, I said. My son asked me to leave his house, in front of his guests. She didn't look surprised, only certain. I see, she said quietly. A small silence followed. Then she closed the folder gently and folded her hands. Your husband anticipated something like this might happen, she said. The words didn't shock me, not after the voicemail, but hearing them out loud made them real. What exactly did he anticipate, I asked. Linda exhaled slowly. George came to me about 6 months before his passing, she said. He was concerned about the future, specifically about the dynamics between you, your son, and anyone who might enter his life later. Vanessa. He had been thinking ahead, even then. He loved Ethan deeply, she continued, but he also recognized certain traits in him, a tendency to seek approval, to avoid conflict, to be influenced. I nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Linda gave a faint, understanding smile. He didn't see that as a flaw, she said, but he did see it as something that could become a vulnerability under the right circumstances. A vulnerability. The words settled into place, and so she went on, opening the folder. Again, he put certain safeguards in place. She slid a document toward me. This, she said, is part of a delayed directive. I looked down at the paper, my eyes scanning lines of legal language I didn't fully understand yet. Delayed, I repeated. Yes, she said. It was designed to remain inactive unless a specific condition was met. My pulse quickened. And what condition is that she met my eyes directly, that you be formally disrespected, displaced, or removed from a residence that was financially established in part or in whole by your personal contribution. The room went very still. I swallowed. So, yesterday triggered it. Yes, she said. Based on your account and the timing of our notification, it appears that it did. I leaned back in my chair, trying to absorb the weight of that. George hadn't just worried. He had planned. Carefully, precisely. What does the directive do, I asked. Linda reached into the folder again and pulled out another document. It activates 2 things, she said. First, a legal reassessment of the ownership structure of your son's home. My breath caught. The home is not owned solely by Ethan, she continued. Not in the way he likely believes. Your financial contribution was structured under a protected family trust, one that includes behavioral conditions tied to your treatment as a beneficiary. I stared at her. Behavioral conditions. Yes, she said. In simple terms, your husband ensured that the home would remain secure for Ethan as long as he maintained a basic standard of respect and care toward you. I let out a slow, unsteady breath, and if he didn't, Linda didn't hesitate. Then his control over the property could be legally challenged and potentially revoked. The words echoed in my mind. Revoked. Ethan's home. Gone. Because of what he had done. I pressed my hands together, trying to steady myself. This isn't what I wanted, I said quietly. I understand, Linda replied, and your husband anticipated that as well. She reached for something else in the folder. A sealed envelope. Yellowed slightly at the edges. My heart skipped. What is that? I asked, though I already knew. A letter, she said, written by George, addressed to Ethan. My chest tightened. He left instructions that it be delivered only if the directive was activated, she added. I stared at the envelope, at George's handwriting on the front. Ethan's name, carefully written. Deliberate, he wanted Ethan to hear from him, Linda said softly. Not just through legal consequences, but through his own words. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out, then stopped. Have you read it? I asked. No, she said. It's sealed, and it will remain that way until it's delivered. I nodded slowly. When will he receive it? Linda glanced at her notes. It was scheduled for immediate dispatch upon activation, she said. Sent by certified delivery this morning. This morning. Which meant Ethan would receive it today. I sat back, my thoughts spinning. He had thrown me out. And now, his father, gone for 3 years, was about to walk back into his life in the form of a letter. A letter that would tell him things no one else could. A letter that would force him to face something he had avoided. Not just what he had done, but who he had become. I closed my eyes for a moment, and in that silence I felt it. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Something else, something quieter, heavier. Justice. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that reveals, that strips everything down to truth. I opened my eyes again. What happens now? I asked. Linda met my gaze. Now she said we wait for your son to read that letter. A pause. Then more gently, and we see what kind of man he chooses to be after that. I didn't go back to the motel after leaving Linda Carver's office. I couldn't. The air inside that room had shifted something in me. Something quiet but undeniable. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't just reacting to what had happened. I was beginning to understand it, and more importantly, I was beginning to see that I hadn't been as powerless as I thought. I walked slowly down the city sidewalk, the cold air brushing against my face, clearing the fog that had settled over me the night before. Cars passed, people moved, life continued, but inside me everything felt suspended, paused, waiting. Because somewhere across town, my son was about to receive a letter from a man he thought he had already said goodbye to, and that letter would change everything. I spent the next few hours at a small cafe not far from the office. I ordered tea I didn't drink and sat by the window, my hands wrapped around the cup as if it could ground me. I kept checking my phone. No missed calls, no messages, nothing, which somehow made everything feel heavier. Because silence, I had learned, didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant something was building, something just beneath the surface. I thought about the letter, about George sitting at our kitchen table years ago writing it, taking his time, choosing his words carefully. He had always been that way, measured, thoughtful, the kind of man who didn't speak unless he meant something. What had he written to Ethan? What truths had he decided our son needed to hear, even after he was gone? And more than anything, what would Ethan feel when he read it? Regret, anger, denial, or something deeper? Something that couldn't be dismissed or avoided? I didn't know. And that uncertainty sat heavily in my chest, because no matter what had happened, Ethan was still my son, and the thought of him breaking, even if part of me believed he needed to, was not something I could take lightly. Hours passed. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the cafe floor, and still, nothing. until my phone finally buzzed. I looked down. Ethan. My heart skipped. For a moment, I just stared at his name. Then I answered. Hello, silence. Not empty, but full, heavy, charged. Mom. His voice came through barely recognizable. Gone was the certainty from the night before. Gone was the distance. What remained was something fragile. I got something today, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. I know I replied softly. Another pause. Longer this time. You knew, he asked. I found out this morning, I said. From your father's lawyer. A shaky breath came through the line. I didn't understand it at first, he said. The envelope. The way it was sent, certified. Like it was important. It was, I said. I almost didn't open it, he admitted. I thought maybe it was some kind of legal notice. Something about paperwork. I could hear it in his voice now. The shift, the unraveling. But then I saw his handwriting. He continued. His voice cracked, and I knew. I said nothing, because there was nothing I could say. Not yet. I sat down at the kitchen table. He went on slowly. The same table from last night. The image formed in my mind instantly. The same place, the same room, but everything different now. Vanessa wasn't there, he added. She left early this morning, said she had errands. Something in his tone told me that detail mattered more than he was saying. I opened the letter, he said. His breathing grew uneven, and it was like he was right there. I felt my throat tighten. What did he say? I asked quietly. There was a long silence. So long I thought the call might have dropped. Then he knew, Ethan whispered. My chest tightened. He knew everything, Mom, he said. Not exactly how it would happen, but enough. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. He wrote about me. Ethan continued, about how I always wanted to make people happy, how I avoided conflict, how I let other people shape my decisions. His voice broke. I thought he was just describing who I used to be, he said, but he wasn't. No, he wasn't. He was describing who I would become if I wasn't careful. The words hung between us, sharp, unavoidable. And then Ethan hesitated. I could hear him swallowing hard. He talked about you. My heart slowed. What did he say? I asked. There was another pause. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was softer. He said you were the strongest person he had ever known, he said. That everything we had, everything I have, was because you never stopped giving. A tear slipped down my cheek. He said you would never demand anything in return, Ethan continued. That you would rather lose everything than make me feel guilty. I didn't speak, because that part was true, but then he said something else, Ethan added. His voice changed, heavier, something I can't stop thinking about. I held my breath. He said, Ethan's voice trembled, that if I ever made you feel like a burden, then I had failed not just as a son, but as a man. The words landed with a weight that neither of us could escape. I pressed my hand against my chest as if it might steady something inside me. He wrote that if I ever pushed you out of a home you helped build, Ethan continued, his voice breaking now, then I didn't deserve to call it mine. Silence filled the space between us, not empty, but full of everything that had been said and everything that couldn't be undone. I didn't understand at first, Ethan whispered. I thought it was just his opinion. I waited, and then I kept reading, he said, a shaky breath, and I realized it wasn't just a letter. No, it wasn't. It was a warning, he said. And finally, he understood. I went back to last night, he continued, his voice unsteady, every word, every moment. I could hear it now, the weight of memory catching up with him. The way I spoke to you, he said, the way I let Vanessa. He stopped, didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. I didn't see it, he whispered. I didn't see what I was doing. I opened my eyes, staring out the cafe window. I know, I said quietly, because I did. That had always been the hardest part. Not that he meant to hurt me, but that he didn't see it. Mom, he said again. This time there was something different in his voice. Not just regret, not just confusion, something deeper, something breaking. I think I've made a mistake I can't fix. The words hung in the air. And for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Because part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would be okay, that we could move past it. But another part of me, a quieter, stronger part, knew that some things couldn't be rushed. Some things had to be faced. Fully, honestly. I don't know what to do, Ethan admitted. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again. You start by telling the truth, I said. There was a pause. To yourself, I added. Silence, then a soft, broken breath. I think I already have, he said. And for the first time since that night, I believed him. After that call, I didn't move for a long time. The cafe had begun to fill with the late afternoon crowd voices, rising chairs, scraping dishes, clinking softly, but it all felt distant, like I was sitting behind glass. Ethan's words kept replaying in my mind. I think I've made a mistake I can't fix. There was a part of me that wanted to reach through the phone, hold him, tell him that nothing was beyond repair, that he was still my son, that I still loved him. But there was another part of me, quieter, steadier, that understood something had shifted. Not just in him, in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't rushing to make things okay. I wasn't minimizing my own pain to protect his feelings. I was waiting, letting him sit with the weight of what he had done. And that, more than anything, felt new. The next call came later that evening. I had just returned to the motel, the sky already dark, the air colder than it had been the night before. I was sitting on the edge of the bed again, my coat folded neatly beside me when my phone rang. Ethan. This time I answered on the first ring. Mom! His voice sounded different, clearer, but also more shaken. Yes, I went to see the lawyer, he said. I straightened slightly. Linda Carver. Yeah, he replied. She told me everything. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak. At first I didn't believe it, he admitted. I thought maybe it was just pressure or a misunderstanding. A small bitter laugh escaped him. But it's not. No, it wasn't. She showed me the documents, he continued. The trust, the conditions, the way the house is structured. I could hear the disbelief still lingering in his voice. It's not really mine, Mom, he said quietly. The words hung there, fragile, unfamiliar. It never was, he added, not the way I thought. I closed my eyes for a moment, because hearing him say it made everything real in a way nothing else had. That house exists because of you, he said, because of what you gave up. I didn't respond right away, because for so long I had told myself that didn't matter, that love didn't need acknowledgement, that sacrifice didn't need to be named. But now, it was being named. And it felt heavier than I expected. Ethan, I said gently, I didn't give that money to hold it over you. I know, he said quickly. Too quickly, no. I didn't know, he corrected himself. Not really, his voice cracked slightly. I told myself it was a gift, that it didn't mean anything beyond that. Another pause. But it did, he said. It meant everything. I let the silence sit between us, because this was the truth he needed to reach on his own. I asked Linda what happens now. He continued. My chest tightened slightly. And she said the trust can be enforced, he said. That if the conditions were violated, which they were. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. What does that mean? I asked quietly. It means you could challenge my right to the house, he said. The words came out slowly, carefully, like he was still trying to process them himself. And if that happens, he added, I could lose it. Lose it, the house, the life he thought he had built, all of it. I took a slow breath. That's not what I want, I said. I know he replied immediately, but there was something in his tone, something uncertain. Do you? I asked softly. He didn't answer right away, and in that silence, I understood. Because for the first time, he was seeing me not just as his mother, but as someone with a choice, someone with power, someone he had hurt. I don't know what you want, he admitted finally. His voice was quieter now, more honest. I don't even know if I deserve to ask. That word again, deserve. I leaned back against the wall, my eyes drifting toward the small window. Outside the parking lot was empty, still. Deserve isn't the question right now, I said. Then what is he asked? I thought about it. About everything that had happened, about the dinner, the words, the silence that followed. The question, I said slowly, is whether you understand what you did. A pause. Then I do, he said. His voice didn't waver. I didn't yesterday, he added, but I do now. I studied the tone, the weight behind it. Then say it, I said. Another pause. Longer this time, like he was gathering something difficult. I let someone else define how I saw you, he said. I stayed quiet. I believed things without questioning them. He continued. I didn't ask you. I didn't listen to you. His voice grew tighter. I stood there and let you be humiliated in my own home. The word home caught in his throat. And then I told you to leave. The silence that followed was different. Not empty, but full of acknowledgement, full of truth. I can't take that back, he said. No, I replied. You're right. Another pause. But I can't pretend it didn't happen either. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. That's a start, I said. A shaky breath came through the line. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. Something in my chest shifted at that. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. No entitlement, no expectation, just acceptance. But I need to try to make this right, he added. I waited, because this part mattered. How I asked. There was no hesitation this time. I'm going to confront Vanessa, he said. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. About everything, he continued. The messages, the things she said, the way she framed everything. And if she denies it, I asked. She will, he said. His tone was certain, but I'm not going to back down. A pause. For the first time, I'm not going to avoid it. I closed my eyes briefly, because that was new. I should have done it sooner, he said. Yes, I replied. I know. Silence again. Then I found something else, he added. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? After I got back from the lawyer, he said I went into the garage. There's a box I never really paid attention to before. My heart skipped. A box. Yeah, he said. It has Dad's things in it. Old stuff, papers, photos. A slow realization began to form. And I opened it. He said. His voice softened. And I think there's more in there than I expected. I leaned forward slightly. What kind of more? He hesitated. I don't know yet, he admitted, but it feels important. Of course it did, because George had never done anything without intention. I'm going to go through it tonight, Ethan said, another pause. And then, I'd like to see you. The words landed gently, carefully, not as a demand, not even as a request, more like a hope. I didn't answer right away, because this time, I wasn't rushing. I wasn't filling the silence. I was letting it exist, letting him feel it. I'll think about it, I said finally. A small breath of relief came through the line. Okay, he said. That's fair. Another word that hadn't existed between us in a long time. Mom, he added softly. Yes, I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they didn't feel empty. They didn't feel rushed. They felt earned. Not complete, not enough, but real. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I allowed myself to feel something other than pain. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close, possibility. I didn't sleep much that night either, but this time it wasn't because of shock. It was because something inside me had shifted into a quiet, watchful stillness. For the first time in days, I wasn't replaying the dinner over and over again in my mind. I wasn't asking myself what I could have done differently or how I could have prevented it. Instead, I was waiting to see what Ethan would do next, waiting to see if the man I raised was still somewhere beneath everything that had happened. And strangely, that kind of waiting felt stronger than anything I had felt before. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight filtering through the thin motel curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came back. The dinner, the letter, the call, the truth. I sat up slowly, taking a deep breath, grounding myself in the quiet of the room. My phone was on the nightstand. No missed calls, no messages. I picked it up anyway, scrolling through the contacts, stopping briefly on Ethan's name. I didn't call. Not yet. Because this time, I wasn't the one who needed to reach out. Around noon, my phone finally buzzed. A message from Ethan. I'm at the house. I confronted Vanessa. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. My chest tightened slightly. This was it. The moment where things would either begin to come together or fall apart even further. I typed a short reply. Call me. The phone rang less than a minute later. I answered. Mom. His voice was different again. Sharper this time, but not cold, focused. What happened? I asked. There was a brief pause. Then I asked her about the messages, he said. My grip on the phone tightened, and she denied everything. At first he continued, said I was overreacting, that I was letting the letter get into my head. That sounded exactly like something Vanessa would say. But I didn't back down, he added. Not this time. I closed my eyes briefly. Good, I said. I told her I wanted to see her phone, he went on. Her actual messages, not the ones she showed me before. Another pause. And that's when everything changed. My heart began to beat faster. What do you mean she got defensive, he said, angry, said I didn't trust her. A bitter edge crept into his voice, and for the first time, I told her she was right. I felt something shift in my chest, a small, quiet recognition, growth. She tried to turn it back on you, he continued, said you were manipulative, that you were trying to control me through guilt. I said nothing, because I had heard those accusations before, just not this clearly. But then I asked her something simple, he said. What I asked her why the messages she showed me were screenshots and not actual conversations. My breath caught, and she froze, he said. A long pause followed, heavy, tense. She couldn't answer. He continued. Not right away, I could picture it. The moment the controls slipped, the moment the narrative cracked. So I pressed, he said. I asked her to open the messages in front of me, and did she? Another pause. Then no. The word came out flat, certain. She refused, he said it was invasive, that I was crossing a line. I let out a slow breath, and what did you say? I told her that if she had nothing to hide, it wouldn't matter. Silence stretched between us, and that's when she snapped, he added. My chest tightened. How she started yelling, he said, saying I was ungrateful, that she had been the one holding everything together. A humorless laugh escaped him. She said I would fall apart without her. I closed my eyes, because I had heard that kind of control before. Not in my home, but I recognized it. And then, Ethan hesitated. I waited. She said something else, he continued. His voice dropped, lower, colder, what I asked. She said, if I chose you over her, I would regret it. The words settled heavily in the air, a quiet threat, clear and unmistakable. My heart ached not just for myself, but for him. Ethan? I didn't say anything at first, he interrupted softly. I just looked at her. Another pause. And then I realized something. What I asked gently. I didn't recognize her anymore, he said. The words mirrored something I had felt just the night before, and worse, he added. I didn't recognize myself either. That hurt more than anything else he had said, because it meant he was finally seeing the truth, not just about her, but about what he had allowed. What did you do? I asked. I told her to leave, he said. I froze. What I told her to pack her things and go, he repeated. His voice didn't waver. I said I needed space, that I couldn't stay in that house with her until I understood everything. A long silence followed. Did she leave? I asked. Yes, he said. Another pause, but not quietly. Of course not. She called me every name you can think of, he said. Said I was weak, that I was throwing everything away. His voice tightened slightly, but she packed, and then she left. The words hung there, final, heavy, real. I exhaled slowly, trying to process it. The house, the marriage, the life he had built, all shifting in a matter of hours. Ethan? I said carefully. That's a big step. I know, he replied. No hesitation, no doubt. I should have done it sooner, he added. I didn't argue, because we both knew that was true. I went through the box after she left, he continued. My attention sharpened. The one in the garage. Yeah, what did you find? There was a pause, not uncertain, but emotional. A lot, he said quietly. Photos, old receipts, notes, his voice softened, and a journal. My heart skipped. A journal Dad's, he said. I closed my eyes, because suddenly I could see George again, sitting at the table, writing, thinking, planning. What's in it? I asked. Everything Ethan said. The word came out slowly, like he was still trying to grasp it himself. Mom, he wrote about you. A tear slipped down my cheek. What did he say? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he wrote about how hard you worked, Ethan said. How you never complained. How you gave up things he didn't even know about at the time. My throat tightened. He wrote about the shop," Ethan continued, "about how much it meant to you." I pressed my hand to my chest, "and how you sold it, without hesitation, for me." The silence between us grew heavier, because now there was no denial left. "He knew I would forget," Ethan said softly. The words broke something inside me. "He knew I would take it for granted," he added. I couldn't speak, because I'd never wanted that truth to be spoken out loud. "I read page after page," Ethan continued, "and it was like I was meeting you for the first time." A quiet sob escaped me before I could stop it. "I didn't know," he said. "Not really. I know I whispered, and I meant it. Because I had never told him. Not everything, not like that. I don't know how to fix this," he said again. His voice softer now, more fragile. "But I want to try." I took a slow breath, letting the words settle, letting the silence stretch. "And then we'll see," I said. Not cold, not distant, but honest, because this time, it wasn't about words. It was about what came next. I didn't rush to see him. That might sound cruel to someone listening from the outside. A son finally breaking down, finally seeing the truth, asking for a chance to make things right, and the mother hesitates. But healing doesn't come from rushing, and forgiveness doesn't come from pressure. So I waited, not to punish him, but to give his realization time to settle into something real. 2 days passed. Ethan didn't call again that first night after Vanessa left, but he did send a message the next morning. "I understand if you need time. I'll be here." That was new. No urgency, no expectation, just presence. I read the message twice, then set my phone down without replying. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed to see if that patience would last. Because real change doesn't disappear after a single apology. On the second day, I drove back to my old neighborhood. Not to Ethan's house, but to Maple Street. I hadn't been there since I sold the shop. I told myself I didn't need to, that it was better to move forward. But as I parked across the street and looked at the familiar storefront, I realized something. Moving forward doesn't mean pretending the past didn't matter. The sign had changed. Maple alterations now. New paint, new display. But the bones of it were the same. The window where I used to place finished dresses. The door that chimed every time a customer walked in. I sat there for a long time just watching, remembering the late nights, the quiet pride of building something with my own hands, the way Ethan used to sit in the corner doing homework while I worked. I had given that up, willingly, without regret, but somewhere along the way, that story had been rewritten, reduced, minimized, until even Ethan didn't fully understand what it had meant, until I didn't say it out loud anymore, until it became invisible. I took a slow breath, and for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge something I had avoided for years. What I gave mattered, not because I needed recognition, but because it was part of the truth. And truth, I was beginning to understand, was the only thing that could rebuild anything now. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Ethan. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hi," I said. There was a pause. "Hi, Mom." His voice was quieter this time. Not broken, not frantic, just steady. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up," he admitted. "I'm here," I said. A small silence followed. "I spoke to Linda again," he said. I leaned back in my seat, my eyes still on the shop across the street, and she showed me more documents. He continued. About the house, the trust, everything Dad set up. I didn't interrupt. I didn't realize how detailed it was, he said. He thought of everything. A faint, almost disbelieving laugh escaped him. He even accounted for how I might react. That sounded like George. He wasn't trying to control me, Ethan added. He was trying to protect something. Yes, I said softly. He was. A pause. And I didn't see it, Ethan said. No, I replied gently. You didn't. Silence stretched between us. Then I want to do something, he said. My tension sharpened slightly. What kind of something? There was no hesitation. I want to give the house back, he said. I blinked. What do you mean? I don't want to keep living there like nothing happened, he explained. Not after what I did. Not after everything I've learned. My chest tightened. Ethan? No, he said quickly. Please, let me finish. I stayed quiet. I've been thinking about it, he continued. About what Dad wrote, about what you gave up, about how I treated you. His voice grew heavier. I can't undo that, but I can stop benefiting from it like it doesn't matter. A long pause followed. I want to transfer everything back into the trust the way it was meant to be, he said, and I'll move out if I have to. The words landed carefully, deliberately, not dramatic, just firm. I closed my eyes for a moment, because this wasn't what I expected. This wasn't fear, this wasn't desperation, this was accountability. You don't have to leave your home, I said slowly. Yes, I do, he replied. No hesitation, not because of the law he added, but because of what it represents now. I let out a slow breath. And what does it represent, I asked. Another pause. Everything I didn't appreciate, he said. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard, and everything I took for granted. I didn't speak, because there was nothing to correct, nothing to soften, only truth. I also spoke to Mr. Whitman, Ethan added. I frowned slightly. George's old friend. Yeah, he said. He was at dinner that night. I remembered. The quiet man at the far end of the table. Watching. Listening. What did he say? I asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. He told me he heard Vanessa before dinner, he said. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. He said she was in the kitchen with her sister, Ethan continued. Talking about how after that night, you wouldn't come back. A chill ran through me, even though part of me had already suspected it. He said it sounded planned, Ethan added. Planned. The word settled heavily, like a final confirmation. And I let it happen, Ethan said quietly. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said, because pretending otherwise wouldn't help him now. Another silence. Longer this time. I don't want to be that person, he said. His voice was softer now, more vulnerable. I don't want to be someone who stands there while people I love are hurt and says nothing. My chest tightened. Because that was the part that mattered most. I believe you, I said. And for the first time, I truly did. A breath of relief came through the line. Not loud, not overwhelming, just real. Can I see you? He asked. The question came gently this time. No pressure, no urgency, just a request. I looked at the shop across the street again, at the place I had once built, the place I had walked away from without asking for anything in return, and I realized something. This wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward with the truth finally in the open. Yes, I said, a pause. Really, yes, I repeated, but not at the house. Okay, he said quickly, where I thought for a moment. Then Maple Street, I said, across from the old shop. Another pause. Then I'll be there, he said. I ended the call and sat there for a moment longer, watching the door of the shop, the place where everything had started, the place where I had built something with my own hands. And now, it felt like the right place to begin again, not by forgetting what happened, but by facing it, together. I arrived at Maple Street earlier than we agreed, old habits. When something mattered, I showed up prepared. I parked in the same spot I had used for years just across from the shop and sat there with both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The storefront looked different in the afternoon light, brighter, alive. Someone had arranged a row of dresses in the window, simple, elegant pieces carefully spaced, each one catching the light just enough to draw the eye. For a moment, I imagined myself inside again, thread in hand, measuring tape around my neck, the quiet rhythm of work filling the space. I hadn't allowed myself to miss it like that before. Not out loud, not honestly. But sitting there now, I did. I missed the feeling of building something that was mine, something no one could take or redefine, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. A car pulled up behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew it was him. I could feel it. The car door opened, closed. Footsteps, then silence. I took a breath, opened my door, and stepped out. Ethan was standing a few feet away. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked different. Not physically, but in the way he held himself. There was no defensiveness, no impatience. Just a kind of quiet uncertainty, like he didn't know where to stand, or how close he was allowed to come. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. Another pause. He glanced at the shop, then back at me. "I remember this place," he said. "I know," I said softly. We stood there, the space between us filled with everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. Finally, he took a small step forward. I didn't realize how much this meant to you, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I thought it was just a shop. I nodded slowly. That's because I never told you, I said. He looked down briefly. I should have asked. Yes, I said gently. He exhaled. I've been thinking about that a lot, he said. All the things I never asked. All the things I just assumed. I didn't respond right away, because assumptions had cost us more than either of us realized. Do you want to walk? I asked. He nodded. We started down the sidewalk, moving slowly, side by side, but not quite together yet. I spoke to Vanessa again this morning, he said after a moment. I glanced at him. And she came back, he said. Not to stay, just to talk. My chest tightened slightly. What did she say? Ethan let out a short breath. At first, she tried to apologize. That didn't surprise me. But it didn't feel real, he added. That didn't surprise me either. She said she was stressed, he continued. That she felt like she was always competing with you. I frowned slightly. Competing, yeah, he said. For control, for influence, for me. I looked ahead, my steps slowing just a little. I never saw it that way, I said quietly. I know, he replied. A pause, but she did. We walked a few more steps in silence. She said she felt like she could never measure up, he added. That no matter what she did, she was always second. I stopped walking. He stopped too. And what do you think I asked? Ethan hesitated. Then I think she used that feeling as an excuse, he said. His voice was calm, clear. An excuse to control things, he continued. To shape how I saw you. To make herself feel more secure. I studied his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, but there was none, just clarity. She admitted to editing the messages, he said. My breath caught. Editing. She didn't write fake ones, he explained, but she took real conversations, cut pieces out, rearranged them. I closed my eyes for a moment, because that was worse in a way. It meant the truth had been twisted, not invented. She said she didn't think it would go this far, he added. A bitter edge slipped into his voice. Which I don't believe. I opened my eyes again. Do you still love her? I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the ground. Thinking, sorting. I don't know, he said finally. The honesty in that answer felt right. I think I loved who I thought she was, he continued, but I don't know if that person actually exists. I nodded slowly, because I understood that feeling, and right now I asked. Right now. I don't trust her, he said. Simple, clear, final. We started walking again. The air felt cooler now, the afternoon slipping slowly toward evening. She packed the rest of her things this morning, he said. And she's gone, he replied. Just like that, gone. Not dramatic, not drawn out, just over. I felt a strange mix of emotions settle in my chest. Not relief, not sadness, just stillness. And what about you, I asked. What do you mean, where are you going to stay? He shrugged slightly. I'll figure it out, he said. You don't have to rush, I said. I know, he replied, but I don't feel right staying there. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in days, I saw something I hadn't seen since before Thanksgiving. My son. Not the man who had told me to leave, not the person who had stayed silent while I was humiliated, but the boy I had raised, the one who brought me dandelions and called them roses, the one who didn't always get things right, but cared enough to try. You don't have to punish yourself, I said quietly. I'm not, he replied. Another pause. I'm trying to take responsibility. The distinction mattered, more than he probably realized. We reached the corner and stopped. The shop was just behind us now. The street stretched out ahead, quiet and open. Mom, he said. I turned to him. I meant what I said on the phone, he continued. About the house, about everything. I know, I said. And I'm going to follow through, he added. Not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do. I nodded. I believe you. The words felt steady, grounded, real. A small silence followed. Then I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, he said. They won't, I replied. He nodded. I just want a chance to build something honest. I took a slow breath, looking at him, at the space between us, at everything that had been broken, and everything that might still be rebuilt. That takes time, I said. I have time, he replied. No hesitation, no doubt, just commitment. I studied him for another moment, then come with me, I said. He blinked, where I turned slightly, gesturing back toward the shop. Inside. His eyes widened just a little. Are you serious, yes? A pause. But you sold it, he said. I did, I replied. But that doesn't mean I can't walk through the door. He hesitated for a second, then nodded. We crossed the street together. For the first time since that night, not as strangers, not as adversaries, but as something in between, something unfinished, something fragile, but real. I reached for the door handle. The small bell chimed softly as I pushed it open, and as we stepped inside, I felt it. Not closure, not yet, but the beginning of something else, something quieter, stronger, the first step toward healing. The bell above the door gave that same soft chime I had heard thousands of times before. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The motel room, the dinner, the letter, the distance between me and my son. All of it faded behind that single familiar sound. I stepped inside slowly. The air smelled faintly of fabric and steam, different from before, but not entirely unfamiliar. The layout had changed slightly. New tables, new lighting, but the bones were still mine. Ethan followed quietly behind me, closing the door with care as if he instinctively understood this wasn't just a place, it was something more. A memory, a foundation. A piece of me he was only now beginning to understand. Wow, he said under his breath, looking around. It's different? Yes, I said softly, but not entirely. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled politely. Welcome, she said. Let me know if you need anything. I nodded, returning the smile. We're just looking, I replied. She went back to her work, giving us space. Ethan walked slowly along one side of the shop, his fingers brushing lightly against the fabrics, hanging neatly in rows. I used to sit over there, he said, pointing to a corner near the window. I followed his gaze. There was a small chair there now, not the same one, but close enough. You did, I said. You used to give me scraps of fabric to play with. He added, a faint smile appearing. I felt something warm stir in my chest. You made little flags out of them, I said, and taped them to pencils. He let out a soft laugh. I thought they were important. They were, I replied, because at the time, they were everything. We stood there for a moment, sharing a memory that had somehow survived everything else. Then Ethan's expression shifted. The warmth faded, replaced by something heavier. I didn't understand what this place meant to you, he said. His voice was quiet, honest. I knew you worked hard, he continued, but I didn't see what you were building. I turned to him. That's because I didn't show you, I said. He shook his head slightly. No, I just didn't look. The difference between those two things sat heavily between us, and for the first time, he chose the harder truth. We walked deeper into the shop. Each step felt like peeling back a layer of something long buried. I read more of Dad's journal last night, Ethan said after a moment. My heart tightened slightly, and he took a slow breath. He wrote about the day you decided to sell the shop. I stopped walking. Ethan turned to face me. He said, You didn't hesitate, he continued, that you made the decision in one conversation. I nodded slowly. That's true. Ethan's eyes searched mine. Why, he asked. The question wasn't accusatory, it wasn't defensive. It was genuine, curious, and maybe for the first time, ready to hear the real answer. I took a breath, because this was something I had never fully explained, not to him, not even to myself. You wanted a home, I said simply. He frowned slightly. That's it. Yes, I replied, but he started. I didn't see it as a sacrifice, I continued gently, not at the time. He shook his head again, but it was. Maybe I said, but that's not how it felt. I looked around the shop, at the walls, the tables, the space that had once been mine. I built this place so you wouldn't have to struggle the way we did, I said. So when you needed something bigger, something better, I could help you get there. Ethan's expression tightened. But you gave up everything he said. I gave up a place, I corrected softly. He looked at me, confused. But I didn't give up who I was, I added. A long pause followed. Because that distinction mattered. More than anything else. I think that's what I didn't understand, Ethan said quietly. What? That you didn't see it as losing something, he replied. You saw it as continuing something. I smiled faintly. Yes. Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different, less heavy, more grounded. I made it into something else, Ethan said after a moment. My gaze shifted back to him. What do you mean I turned it into leverage, he admitted. The word landed with quiet weight. Even if I didn't say it out loud, he continued, even if I told myself it was a gift, I still treated it like something that gave me control. I didn't interrupt, because he needed to say it. Fully. I let Vanessa reinforce that he added. I let her convince me that you were overstepping, that you were holding on to something that wasn't yours anymore. His voice dropped. But it was never about control, he said. No, I replied softly. It wasn't. A deep breath left his chest. I see that now. And for the first time, I believed he did. We moved toward the back of the shop. There was a work table there, covered in neatly folded fabric. I ran my hand lightly across it, feeling the texture beneath my fingers. Familiar, comforting. I found something else in the journal, Ethan said. I looked up. What? He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket, pulled out a small, worn notebook. George's. My breath caught. I brought it, he said. Carefully, he opened it, flipped through a few pages, then stopped. There's an entry. From a few months before he passed, he said. My heart began to beat a little faster. What does it say? Ethan looked down at the page, then began to read. Hadley won't ever ask for anything, he said, his voice steady but quiet, even when she deserves it, especially then. My throat tightened. So if Ethan ever forgets who made his life possible, I hope he finds his way back before it costs him everything. The words settled into the space around us, soft but undeniable. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. I think I was already on that path, he said. I didn't respond right away because we both knew he was right, and if that letter hadn't come, he continued. His voice trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I don't know where I would be right now, he admitted. I looked at him, at the man standing in front of me, the man who had hurt me, but who was now facing it, piece by piece. You're here, I said. He nodded, yes. Another pause. Mom, he said, I waited. I don't expect you to forgive me today, he added. I know, I don't even expect it to happen soon. I studied his face, looking for urgency, for pressure, but there was none, just patience. I just want to earn the chance, he said. The words landed gently, carefully, and for the first time, they didn't feel like a request. They felt like a promise. I took a slow breath, letting the moment settle, letting everything we had said exist without rushing to resolve it. Then that's how it should be, I said. A small, quiet shift passed through his expression. Not relief, not excitement, just acceptance. And that was enough, for now. We stood there in the shop a little longer, not talking, not needing to, just being. And as I looked around that space at what I had built, at what I had given, at what had been lost, and what might still be found, I realized something. This wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward, with truth instead of silence. And for the first time since everything had broken apart, that felt possible. We didn't leave the shop right away. There was something about that space, about the quiet hum of work, the rhythm of fabric and thread that made it easier to breathe, easier to think, easier to say things that had been sitting unsaid for far too long. Ethan moved slowly around the room, pausing at different tables, taking everything in as if he were trying to understand it piece by piece. This is where you stood all day, he asked, resting his hand lightly on the edge of a cutting table. Most days, I said, sometimes longer. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I used to think you liked being busy, he said. I did, I replied. But now, I think... He hesitated, searching for the right words. You were doing it for something. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said, I was. He looked at me. For us, he added. I didn't answer right away. Because that answer wasn't simple, yes, I said finally, but also for myself. He seemed to absorb that slowly, and I could see it, the shift in his understanding, the realization that my life hadn't been built solely around him, even if he had always been at the center of it. I think I forgot that you had your own life, he said quietly. I met his eyes. That happens, I said. But it shouldn't have, he replied. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no attempt to soften the truth, just recognition. And that mattered more than anything else he could have said. We left the shop together and walked back outside. The air had grown colder, the sky beginning to dim as the afternoon slipped into evening. Ethan stood beside me on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly tense, but not closed, just uncertain. I spoke to Linda again this morning, he said after a moment. I turned to him. What did she say? She explained what I need to do to restructure everything, he replied. The house, the trust, all of it. I nodded slowly, and I've already started the process, he said. There was no pride in his voice, no expectation of approval, just a statement. I'm transferring everything back under the original trust structure, he continued, the way Dad intended. I studied his face, looking for hesitation, for second thoughts, but there were none. And where will you go, I asked. He shrugged slightly. I've been looking at short-term rentals, he said. Something small, just until I figure things out. I felt a small tightening in my chest. You don't have to rush out, I said. Legally, you're still allowed to stay there. I know, he replied, but I don't feel right staying. The same words he had used before. But this time, they carried more weight, more conviction. It's not just about the house, he added. It's about what I need to rebuild. I nodded, because I understood that, better than he probably realized. We walked a little further down the street before stopping again. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, like both of us were learning how to exist in it without filling it too quickly. Mom, he said. I turned slightly toward him. I've been thinking about something else, he continued. What? The shop? My heart skipped. What about it? He hesitated. Then, what if you had it again? The words caught me off guard. I blinked. What do you mean, I mean? He paused, choosing his words carefully. What if we tried to get it back, or something like it? I looked at him, searching his face. Ethan. No, I'm not trying to fix things with money, he said quickly. That's not what this is. His voice steadied. I saw you in there, he said. The way you looked, the way you moved. A small pause. That's who you are. I felt something stir inside me. Not excitement, not yet, but recognition. You don't have to do that, I said gently. I know, he replied. Another pause. But I want to help you rebuild something that's yours. The word yours lingered. Important, intentional. I don't want to take anything from you again, he added. I want to give something back. The right way. I took a slow breath, because this was different. Not guilt, not obligation, but understanding. I need to think about that, I said. Of course, he replied immediately. No pressure, no insistence, just patience. We stood there for a moment longer. The streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow over the sidewalk. People passed by, unaware of the quiet shift happening between us. Mom, Ethan, said again. Yes, I meant what I said before, he continued. About not expecting forgiveness, I nodded. I know. But I also want you to know, he paused, his voice softening, I'm not going anywhere this time. Something in my chest tightened. Not painfully, but deeply. I'm going to show up, he said, consistently, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it takes a long time. I looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the absence of the defensiveness that had been there before. That's what matters, I said quietly. Not words, not promises, but presence. We walked back toward our cars. The distance between us felt different now. Not gone, but no longer a wall, more like a space that could be crossed with time, with effort, with truth. When we reached the cars, Ethan stopped. So, what happens now? He asked. I considered the question, not rushing to answer, because this time, I wanted the answer to be real. Now, I said slowly, we take it one step at a time, he nodded. That's fair. Another pause. Can I call you? He asked. The question was simple, but it meant more than it sounded. Yes, I said. A small breath of relief escaped him. Okay. He opened his car door, then paused. Thank you for meeting me today. I held his gaze. Thank you for showing up. He nodded once, then got into his car. I stood there for a moment watching as he pulled away, not with the heaviness I had felt days before, but with something quieter, something steadier. When I got back into my own car, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, hands resting in my lap, letting everything settle. The pain wasn't gone, not even close, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. It didn't define the entire space inside me. There was room now for something else, for possibility, for rebuilding. Not what we had before, but something more honest, more grounded, more real. And as I finally started the engine and pulled away from Maple Street, I realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different one. One built not on assumptions, but on truth. The first few weeks after that meeting didn't feel dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no sudden transformations, no perfect apologies that erased everything that had happened. Instead, there was something quieter, something slower, something real. Ethan called every few days at first. Not long conversations, not forced ones, just consistent. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Did you eat today?" "How are you feeling?" Simple questions. But they mattered, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the one holding everything together. I didn't feel like I had to reach out first. He showed up, and that changed something. True to his word, Ethan moved out of the house within 2 weeks. He found a small one-bedroom apartment across town. Nothing impressive, just enough space to live. When he told me he didn't ask for approval, he didn't explain it like a sacrifice. He just said, "It feels right," and I believed him. Because by then, I had started to see the pattern. Not perfection, but effort. Consistent effort. The legal process took longer. Linda Carver handled everything carefully, reviewing the trust, restructuring the ownership, making sure George's intentions were respected without turning the situation into something destructive. I made it clear from the beginning I'm not trying to take anything away from my son. Linda nodded. "I know," she said. But sometimes restoring balance requires acknowledging what was already there. That word again, balance. It wasn't about punishment, it wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And slowly, things were put back into place. The house remained under the trust. Ethan no longer treated it as something he owned outright, but more importantly, he stopped acting like anything in his life existed without connection to the people who helped build it. Vanessa filed for divorce within a month. It wasn't dramatic. No drawn-out battles, no public confrontations, just paperwork. Final. Ethan told me about it one evening over the phone. "I don't feel angry," he said. "I listened. I just feel clear," he added. That surprised me. "Clear, yeah," he said. "Like I finally understand what I allowed and what I won't allow again." There was no bitterness in his voice, no lingering attachment, just acceptance. And that told me more than anything else. As for me, I didn't go back to the motel. Not for long anyway. A few days after everything settled, I returned to my own small house, the one I had kept after selling the shop. It felt different when I walked through the door. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. A quiet that belonged to me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. The idea of the shop stayed with me, not as a regret, but as a possibility. Ethan didn't bring it up again right away. He gave me space to think, to decide, and that mattered more than the offer itself. A few weeks later, I found myself back on Maple Street, standing across from the shop again, watching, remembering. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't looking at what I had lost. I was looking at what I could build. Again. "I was hoping I'd find you here." I turned at the sound of Ethan's voice. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a small smile on his face. "You're getting predictable," he added lightly. I smiled faintly. "Maybe," I said. He stepped closer, standing beside me. We both looked at the shop. "Have you thought about it?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I took a slow breath. "I don't want that shop back," I said. He nodded immediately. "Okay, no disappointment, no pressure, just acceptance. But I do want something new," I added. He turned to me. What kind of something? I looked at the street, at the people passing by, at the quiet space that still felt full of possibility. "I want to create a place where women like me don't feel like they've been left behind," I said. His expression softened. "A place where they can learn something, build something. Feel useful again," I continued. "Not just sewing, but community." Ethan nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." he said. I smiled. It is. A small pause. And if you want help, he started. I'll let you know, I said gently. He nodded. Fair. It took a few months. But eventually I found a small space not on Maple Street, but close enough. Bright windows, enough room for a few tables, a place that felt right. We called it Second Stitch, because sometimes life gives you a chance to start again, not from the beginning, but from where you are. The opening day wasn't grand. No big event, no crowd, just a few women, some older, some not, all carrying their own stories, their own losses, their own quiet strength. Ethan was there, not in the front, not taking credit, just helping, setting up chairs, fixing a loose shelf, making sure everything worked, and when people asked who he was, he simply said, I'm here to help, nothing more, nothing less. A year passed, slowly, steadily, not perfect, but real. And then, Thanksgiving came again. This time, I didn't wait for an invitation. I was in my kitchen early that morning preparing the same dishes I had made the year before. Stuffing, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes. The smell filled the house warm and familiar, comforting. At around 10 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Soft, careful. I walked over slowly, my hand resting on the handle for just a moment before I opened it. Ethan stood there, holding a turkey in one hand, a small bag of groceries in the other. He looked nervous, not uncertain, just aware. Hi, Mom, he said. Hi, I replied. A small pause. Then may I come in? The question was simple, but it carried everything. Respect, awareness, change. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man he had become. Not perfect, not finished, but trying. And this time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped aside. Of course, I said. He walked in slowly, setting the turkey down carefully on the counter, taking in the space, not like he owned it, but like he was grateful to be there. And as I watched him move through my kitchen, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in small ones, in consistent ones, in honest ones. And this was one of them. Later that day, we sat at the table together, just the two of us. No tension, no performance, just presence. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. Not because everything was the same, but because everything was finally real. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we love the most. But what I've learned is this: love without respect cannot survive, and sacrifice without truth will eventually be forgotten. For years, I believed that giving everything meant I was doing the right thing. That love meant staying silent, staying patient, staying understanding no matter what. But I was wrong. Love is not about disappearing for someone else. It's about standing in your truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it risks everything, because the people who truly love you will find their way back to that truth, and those who don't were never meant to stay. Forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened. It's about allowing healing to begin when the other person is willing to face the truth. Take responsibility and change, not in words, but in actions, real ones, consistent ones. And sometimes, the most powerful justice is not revenge, it's clarity. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, would you forgive them if they truly changed? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, you are never alone in what you feel.